Welcome to the Hush Hour podcast. In this series, called Becoming Mystic, Looking Behind the Veil, I'll be talking to people either born psychic or who learn to develop and apply those skills to inspire and comfort other people on their life's journey. John Smallman was perhaps as surprised as anyone to find himself becoming a psychic channel for Jesus and Saul. He was a survivor of a Jesuit boarding school and was living a fairly conventional, even unremarkable life as an airline pilot, husband and father, until one day he picked up a book that would forever change his life.
Hello. This is John with Jesus' message for Friday, July 2nd, 2021. Today he is addressing our need to be mindful, to be present. You do not need to do anything to move into wakefulness. You just need to be. You are all, every sentient being without any exceptions, firmly established on your personal paths to awakening. Even though there is only the one experiences itself differently through each of you as you follow your individual paths to awakening. None of those paths are accidental, unintended, or inadvertent. Each of you very carefully chose the paths that you are now following towards the grand awakening because you wanted to be as helpful as you possibly could be by portraying an uplifting demonstration of the awakening process to those with whom you would interact during this lifetime as a human in form.
Well, I got into channeling originally, knowing about it quite by accident, except there aren't any accidents. Everything is intended. So I was waiting for my wife to come downstairs. We were in her parents' home, and there was a book on the coffee table called Seth Speaks. Well, what crap is that? And I picked it up to thumb through it, and I was captivated. And I'd never heard of channeling before that. That was about 1981 or 82. And so I got all of Jane Roberts' channeled books by Seth. Very good stuff. And then after that, I went and found other channels. There was, I think, Zachary was a lovely guy, and Orin, and Bartholomew, and Cryon. I read loads of channeling books from 1981 or so. And in the early 90s, I began to think, it'd be nice to have a spiritual guide of my own, like these people have. And so I sat down one evening. I was an airline pilot for all my life. And I was in Sao Paulo, I think it was, Brazil. And we had a night flight back to Los Angeles. And I was all ready to go, and it was half an hour to pick up. Oh, hey, I'll sit down with pen and paper and see what comes through. So I said, dear God, if there is somebody of high spiritual integrity and intelligence who would like to channel through me, I'm here willing and able. And instantly, Saul came through. And he gave me a lovely brief message, ended up by saying, there you are, John, channeling is easy. And then explained that we would do a lot of it. And that's how it started. So I started doing it in 1995 and channeled nearly every day, and didn't do anything with it. Then we moved up to this part of the world in 2003, and my wife used to go to a herbalist who also talked to the angels and saints and did lovely healing work with spiritually. And so I went along with her a number of times, got to know the woman, and we talked about my channeling. And finally she said, John, why aren't you getting it out there? And I said, well, I've been thinking I should, but you really need to. And I said, yeah, I tried to write a book, it didn't work. And she said, well, why don't you try and see if you can get into a magazine or something like that? And I thought, yeah, I could do that, I suppose. But the idea didn't appeal. And then I heard about blogging. It was 2009, and blogging was relatively new then. You know, you heard about it on the internet. So I went out and bought Blogging for Dummies. And then looked up online to see who could do it. And I chose WordPress, and that was it. I set it all up, no big deal. It was quite simple back then. And after that, I started posting the messages. And then in about 2011, I got a sort of nudge, very, very faint, that Jesus wanted to come through. And I dismissed it out of hand because I'd been studying A Course of Miracles for a few years. And thought, and there are other people who channel Jesus. I thought, he doesn't need another channel. This is my ego. This is bullshit. So I dismissed it. But over a course of the month, I kept getting these little nudges. And so finally I sat down at the keyboard. By then, did I know I was still doing it, writing it by hand in a notebook? And I invited him in, and boom, there he was. So yeah, so that's how that started. And
I was going to ask you about that, because I would imagine anyone receiving a nudge from the great master would think, oh God, no, that's just my ego. You know, why would he choose me above?
Well, exactly.
So
yeah. No, well, that was me totally, because you know, I had 10 years of Jesuit boarding school, and I'm not academically inclined, so I was always bottom of the class. It was a total disaster. And I left 2 terms before A-levels because I was bored out of my mind. I managed to get my parents to take me out. My father didn't give a toss, but my mother really wanted me to stay on and go to Oxford or something like that. No interest in that at all. I like reading stuff, and but to actually do my own research, no way. So fortunately, they agreed, and my father paid for me to become a pilot. And then I got various jobs and ended up doing it as a career, and it worked for me. And once I was established in that, I got back to thinking, well, what am I here for? You know, I'd had the odd nudge in my, I suppose, 20s that, you know, this isn't what life's about. There's more to it, you know. And I was very good. I went to Catholic church and communion and all that every Sunday, and didn't really do much for me, but we did it, you know.
So you were fairly conventional when you were growing up.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And then my marriage broke up, and I moved in with someone else who we eventually married. We have a daughter. We were together for 37 years. And so I was in this confusing state. I'd never been so happy in my life, but I was in mortal sin, as the Catholic Church puts it, you know. And then I was watching my 2 sons kick a football around. And it was during the Iraq-Iran war, which must have been, 82, 83. And so Saddam Hussein was the big monster at the time, and I was watching them kick this ball around and thought, well, if they turned out to be like Saddam Hussein or Hitler or Stalin, I obviously wouldn't approve, but I'd never stop loving them. And that was a light bulb moment for me, because I'd never lost a belief in a higher power, God, whatever you want to call it. And I thought, well, God is infinite love. So if I feel like that about my kids, and he is infinite love, hey, I've got nothing to worry about. And all my guilt just evaporated. It was great.
All the people in the world right now have a job to do, even the ones that we consider to be evil.
Oh, absolutely.
Or motivated by greed or whatever.
We're all on a path. We all chose to be here at this time to help in the awakening process. And lots of us have forgotten that. From what I get from both Jesus and Saul is just by holding the intent to be only loving, it spreads enormously. You know, you're not just alone. There is only the one. But we don't get feedback, so it's very difficult to believe sometimes. You know, you sit there meditating or holding the intent, and then the thought comes up, this is a waste of damn time. I'm having no effect at all. You know, there are people out there doing wonderful things. And then I come back to what I've read, and I say, no, that's ego coming up and trying to distract me. The fact that I was born and brought up Catholic and believed totally in hell and damnation, and then changed my mind about it, I suppose that was something. But and you've presumably been following a spiritual path for quite a long time. If you
and I didn't have a single moment when I suppose I woke up. It's been a gradual process.
Right.
Things happen. Usually, sort of dramatically, emotionally traumatizing things have happened that have actually taught me, that actually taught me a lot about myself on a level that I would never have reached if I hadn't been through it.
Yeah, so I just shut down all my emotions. I think, you know, I was sent to boarding school at 8. And, my parents were saying, my mother was, my father just wasn't there. It was kind of weird. In those days, you were allowed 3 visits from your parents during the term.
Wow.
So you couldn't see them for the first 3 weeks. And then after that, you could see them either on a Saturday or a Sunday from midday till 6.
Oh, gosh.
And I told my mum I hated it, please take me out. And a friend of mine who was a year older had been sent to another Catholic boarding school, hated it, begged his parents to take him out, and they did. So I was rather pissed off that my parents wouldn't.
I can imagine.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I couldn't even read when I went to school. So my mother would write letters to me and I'd have to find another boy to read it to me, which,
Wow.
finally I realized they're not taking me out. So I just learned to deal with it. And my dad just didn't relate to me at all. He'd been very crushed, I think, as a child. His father started from nothing, living in London. And his father went out to a London show, and his father used to close the door and lock it at 10 o'clock at night. So my father's father got back at 10:15, the door was locked, and his father wouldn't let him in.
Oh, God.
So he left home and never came back. And I think he was about 16 or 17 from what I heard. He went and got a job as a clerk somewhere, and he was bright, and it was in a solicitor's office. So they eventually gave him his articles, and eventually he founded his own business. So he was a very dominating sort of person. And my father grew up sort of 1903, 1920, that sort of just during the First World War, and was fascinated by radio and had great interest in that and made crystal radio sets. And his father knew Mr. Marconi.
Oh, wow.
Could have introduced him, but instead he said, no, Jack, you're going to be a lawyer. I'm a solicitor. So that's what it was. So my poor father did something he hated, which I think was why he let me become a pilot. He was so shut down himself that he just couldn't communicate. When I was in my late 20s, it was like a role reversal. I was more like his father than he was my father. It was kind of strange.
I think it's unfortunate for men too, I think, especially of that generation.
Yes, absolutely. Emotions were not allowed. You weren't allowed to cry, to feel, to express anything. You had to be tough.
It's dreadful, really, when you think, because, we're all human. We all have emotions, and it must do something to you to push everything down and not to be able to express them freely. Not that you want people to go around weeping all over the place, but that's not the point.
Yeah.
The fact that you can't, your heart can't be open in that way. I think it's really, really hard for men in general, but especially men of an older generation.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's all part of the evolution that we're undergoing. It's meant to be like that. Actually, first we were physical when we did what we had to do to survive. And then slowly, I guess, from the 1500s onwards, things opened up a bit. Luther, I think, helped a lot, breaking the absolute dominance of the Catholic Church, crushing everybody who didn't agree with it. And the whole thing was political, not spiritual at all. And it's intriguing the way the clergy enjoyed the power that it gave them over the illiterate masses.
Yes, I know. No, it's definitely a control mechanism.
Yeah, and it's still going on. We're still buying into the official view from the party we support or our government or whatever. This cabal is trying desperately to keep humanity under control, and it's losing its grip.
I sincerely hope it does, and sooner rather than later, although it's going to be very difficult for a lot of people who've bought into it.
Oh, I know, but this is part of the awakening process. It's interesting because did you see this book or read it?
I've seen it. I haven't actually read it yet, but I would love to, so I'm going to put that on my shopping list, definitely.
You have the title, right? Our Divine Destiny Small book. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Anyhow, I just opened it at random here before we started just to see what he had to say. And it's rather nice because if I may read it to you, it's about
I'd be delighted.
paragraphs. It's chapter 47 from the book, which is a tremendous amount of rapid progress is being made with regard to the general awakening of humanity. Every human is being nudged into wakefulness, although some do go back to sleep and require further nudges. The divine plan for humanity is proceeding exactly as divinely intended and will always continue to do so. Those who are awake and those who are awakening are creating enormous waves of spiritual energy which greatly assist in raising the consciousness and awareness levels of all of humanity. So continue to do what you are doing and maintain a positive attitude. Your attitude is yours to shape and adjust. You know deep within yourselves that the divine plan is perfectly wonderful and perfectly on schedule. Allow that knowledge into your conscious awareness at every moment and be in joy. That is what you are here to do. Let go of your misperceptions, which focus your attention on the negative and on the non-spiritual, because that gives them energy and thus drains you. And, you know, I thought, yeah, that's so appropriate for what's happening now. Yeah, when I left my first wife, she held on to the children and was very angry that I left, which is, you know, when you leave, it's painful for people.
Mm-hmm.
And so my kids never, ever had Christmas with me.
Okay.
And she died of breast cancer. And for Christmas 2003, we just moved to New England.
Mm.
My two sons and my daughter all came and spent Christmas with us. The first time that I'd had them all together at the same time. It was lovely.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that must have been amazing.
Yeah. So,
did you manage to heal? Were there any rifts, or did you?
well, I mean, I've always kept in touch with my boys. I sent them to boarding schools and I was always there for them, went to their games and so on. My parents were always late. The one thing I managed to do athletically was the high jump. And we had sports day, and that's when the parents come and see their children doing wonderful things. And I was in the final. So I begged my parents to be, they missed it.
Oh.
And I thought, oh, fuck, you know, I mean, I didn't know that word back then, but I was really pissed off. And
Sorry, that was the last word I was expecting to hear coming out of your mouth.
I mean, yeah, my eldest son gets upset sometimes with my language, but you know,
no,
hey.
it's really funny because I was thinking of you as this sort of beatific kind of gentle guy, you know, sort of
Right.
living in the
Well, I am
clouds.
at times, yes, I am, but you know,
It's just
the F word has become the go-to adjective for so long now. And you know, now it doesn't matter what people say, you know, I finally got to the realization that you can only be offended if you choose to be offended. Of Course in Miracles makes it quite clear that this is an illusion we're living in. It's a dream. We're going to wake up. But nevertheless, people do suffer terribly. And you look at what's going on in some of these places, and it's very difficult to get a balance there. You know, I'm in a lucky place. I'm quiet. I'm at peace. I enjoy life. I can send love to people. And there are all these poor people being, you know, children being abducted and raped, and
yeah, I know.
and it's sort of. But this is it coming to the surface, and it's,
yeah. I mean, it's a paradigm shattering moment.
yeah, yeah. And as Saul and Jesus both say, you know, when you wake up, all that will be gone because it was a dream. It didn't really happen.
Do not be concerned by the seeming worldwide chaos and confusion presently affecting all of humanity, which is also, of course, affecting you. It is all a major aspect of the awakening process, so perfectly designed and being implemented in every moment by Mother, Father, God, Source, Love, all that is. When you experience any sense of inadequacy or overwhelm, remind yourself that all is divinely taken care of, that there are no accidents. All that occurs is divinely intended to lead you safely and most expeditiously home to reality, your eternal home from which you have never, not even for an instant, departed.
When you're here physically touching things, it's very hard to sort of move into that. You can momentarily, and then you have to deal with the life around you. So it is weird. You know, I spent a lot of time channeling and reading channel stuff, and then I'll take a break and read stuff on politics and what's going on in the world, and I go back and forth, you know, and I think I probably need to be aware of both. At the moment, I've just finished a book by Noam Chomsky.
Oh, I think he's amazing. I love him.
Yeah. And it's basically, he's looking at what happened between the First World War and 2016, and the way America has conducted all these operations all around the world and has always wanted to be in power, and how conveniently one doesn't look at that most of the time. You see the headlines.
Yeah, I find it really puzzling.
Yeah.
How people don't see it in its true light, because
well, they don't want to. It's very uncomfortable to see that your government is doing that sort of thing when you're a person of honesty and integrity, and you bring up your children well, and you have loving friends, and you treat them well, and you see this country as being such a wonderful place. And it's very hard to believe that those who are governing are doing what they're doing. As Noam Chomsky points out, we, you know, those in power don't give a shit about popular
No.
opinion because they don't have to respond to it.
Quite
And
so.
that's what he's been pointing out. The book sort of covers various things that have happened that America has done over the years, and it's kind of mind-blowing. You know, everything that is happening is meant because we need to wake up fast.
Yes, it does need to be fast.
And the other thing, I came across two things. My brother-in-law is very bright, and he sent me a video that was probably made in about 1990 by a guy called Galen Windsor, who went into the military just at the end of the Second World War in America. I think he was in the Navy, and he was bright, and he ended up in the nuclear industry, the nuclear, as he calls it. He was therefore involved in building the early nuclear power stations. And the one he was working on, they had a great big pool for cooling the elements of whatever you were making the power with. And it was very, very warm. He used to swim in it and even drink it. The water was lovely. And basically, the whole thing about radiation is bullshit.
Oh.
It's a great big financial thing, scam. Fortunes made getting rid of the waste, fortunes made building the stuff. And it suddenly, you know, I only watched this the other day and it suddenly clicked with me. Yeah, everything is energy. So therefore everything radiates an energy field. So I guess if you adjust your Geiger counter to measure uranium or plutonium, it'll go clickety click when you put it close to something.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because if you look at Chernobyl, how Chernobyl has been taken over by wildlife. And
exactly.
They don't seem to have like 3 heads and
no, exactly. Yeah, there's no damage at all. Yeah, it's basically massive things are happening because we massively need a massive awakening.
Yeah.
And, you know, we can't ignore it now. You know, I think the First World War was a chance because, you know, in England, people and Europe generally, why did we kill all these young men? For what good was it? You know, the whole thing was insane. And then because we were so harsh in our judgment of Germany after winning the war, that it made it impossible for them to redevelop afterwards. And that's why Nazism rose up. It was a very small percentage of the people. And people are very good at doing what they're told. And now, you know, this divisiveness that the media do is just mind-blowing.
Oh, it's
all
an abomination, really.
And if one is open to it, as I think more and more people are, I think that's great. We needed to see this. And it is horrific, but we need to know, and we are awakening, definitely.
Now is the time to awaken from that dream, that unreal state which seems to have held you in its thrall for so long, feeling lost and abandoned. You are beings of love, but as beings in form, you are basically unaware of the love that envelops and embraces you in every moment. The illusion of life in form, which you constructed to experience separation, was brilliantly designed for the purpose that you intended. Your divine beings, eternally at one with Source.
But do you think overall, from your experiences of channeling, that there is hope? Right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I get depressed and doubtful, and I have not been doing much channeling recently because I'm just putting a block up for some reason. And I started a Saul channeling at the end of April.
Okay.
And I still haven't finished it.
Oh.
And he's talking about the corruption in high places and things like that. And part of me is like, that's not spiritual. I shouldn't, you know. And I'm not thinking that, but that is the emotion that comes up.
It's a tricky line to walk, that one.
Yeah,
Isn't it? When people are looking to you for spiritual guidance, they don't necessarily want to hear about the 3D stuff.
Yeah. And there are spiritual people I've talked to who just don't want to go there at all. And sometimes I think, well, maybe they're right. Maybe I'm focusing too much on that.
Do you think that anyone can channel?
Unless the ego prevents it. Yeah, I think anyone can. I mean, basically, we all have a spiritual support team. And as Jesus or Saul said in one of the, I think it was Jesus, he said, look, you know, sit down and address whoever it is that you normally pray to in the spiritual realm, and they will respond instantly. I mean, Jesus said at one stage, you know, when you call on us, we answer instantly. You will never be put on hold waiting for the next available associate.
That's funny.
And I thought that was lovely, yeah. So, they're there all the time. We're the ones who choose not to see, We're
Maybe it's also because people think they have to be in a special state in order to chant.
Well, I think a lot of us grew up with that. I think younger people today may be more open to it.
Yeah.
Because as a little boy, I grew up thinking Jesus was wonderful and straight, and I was so evil and bad. So if I'd been aware of channeling then, I would never thought it was possible. And and it wasn't until I, got that awakening moment, really, that my sort of spirituality came online.
Well, a lot more people are awakening to all sorts of kinds of spirituality now.
I think so, yeah. And I think the Catholic Church, the younger priests are sort of waking up and saying stuff which is upsetting the hierarchy very badly. So it's interesting to see what will happen, you know?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot more sort of earth-centered spirituality than
Yes, definitely, yeah. We are all one, therefore we're one with the earth. Yeah, there's no way we can't be, yeah. I mean, you only have to look at the world around us and we realize there is no way we could live independently. We are totally dependent on our environment. Totally.
Absolutely, and we've completely disconnected ourselves from that. You know, as if trees don't matter, as if the air doesn't matter, you know, as if nothing matters except what we are currently doing.
Ancient history is now realizing that, in fact, there were civilizations very much advanced prior to ours. We were not the first one, and that is, you know, Graham Hancock has written a lot about that, and
yes,
it's very interesting. You know,
did you read a book? Now, what was it called again? Secrets of Lost Races. Have you read that book? I think it's Renee Norbergen.
No, I haven't read that
book.
one. No.
I read it years and years ago, and it's about how they managed to find buried in the strata of the rock, so really ancient things like lead acid batteries.
Wow, yeah.
Made differently, made in an organic way and not in the sort of plastic way that we make things now. It's a really interesting book.
There's that great excavation going on in Turkey somewhere that is proving that, you know, there was an enormous civilization 8,000 or 10,000 years ago that, you know, they're suddenly uncovered.
We are very arrogant. We think we're the only ones, don't we, at the top of the tree. And
that again is the ego thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, it's part of our upbringing. We're brought up and shamed as little ones, and then the ego rebels, and suddenly I don't need anyone.
Yeah, and it's also a childish way of looking at the world, isn't it?
Oh, totally,
like children are completely self-centered. Everything revolves around them.
Yeah.
And we are the same. We think everything revolves around us. It's just like we used to think that the sun revolved around the earth.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And then you have to wake up and realize that it's not about that at all.
That's right, yeah. I mean, it seems that most people are emotionally somewhere between the age of about 3 and 8. Intellectually, they may way beyond that, so they can invent nuclear devices and tanks and weapons and God knows what. But emotionally, they're back in there and they get upset and hurt and angry and they want to be the best and they will do anything to crush someone who's in their way. You know, if the ego is that strong, as it is in obviously most of our politicians, definitely.
Yes, oh my God. But then they've been so kind of lionized and spoiled and, you know, given this privileged background that everything's been given to them on a plate. So they probably wouldn't survive if they had to go through what a normal person has to go through. Slightly off topic, I wrote down, well, I've been listening to people who've been saying that the more you elevate your consciousness, the more likely it is that you're going to start seeing things like, for example, UFOs. And so I wondered about extraterrestrials and your take on, I mean, obviously they're part of the scheme of things also, because there's this whole other subculture of people who are really into UFOs and extraterrestrial saviors or, you know, reptilian monsters and all of that kind of thing. So, wanted to know what you thought.
Well, I think it's very arrogant of us to think that we are the brightest and most intelligent and most advanced species in the universe.
I think so. I mean, I
think that there aren't other people more advanced is, you know, insane.
Have you ever seen any UFOs yourself or anything like that?
I had an interesting thing once. I was coming back from Japan to Hawaii, and it was just before sunrise. It was sort of, the sky was getting light. And often when aeroplanes pass in the night, they flash their landing lights. And some of them at night just leave them on all the time for some reason. They think it's better they're not going to run into each other. I mean, the separation is so well organized, the chance of that are remote. So maybe some just like, oh, there is somebody else out there. You know, you're in the middle of the dark over the Pacific Ocean, nothing going on, you know. It can feel possibly very lonely for some people. I don't know. Anyhow, so I see an airplane coming the other way, landing lights. And, if that happens, you just pass. But this one came towards us, and then it turned across us. And as it turned across, it was like a load of little lights along what might have been a fuselage or something like that, or windows on a train. and it turned away and it was gone.
Wow.
Wow, that's interesting. I mean, we're going as fast as anything does over the Pacific, and that was going faster than us. If it could turn across us like that and be gone. So, yeah, I don't know what it was.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And some Japanese pilots back in the, I think it was 70s or 80s, had a very interesting experience. They were flying from New York to Anchorage. It was a freighter, and they used to land at Anchorage, refuel, and a new crew would take it on to Tokyo. So when they were sort of somewhere over Alaska, the flight engineer looked up from his panel, which is here, the captain and co-pilot are there, and there's a door out into the rest of the airplane there. Looked up, there's a window, and there's a man looking in.
What?
Yeah. He said, Captain, look. And they all saw it. And he leaps out of his seat, opens the door, there's nobody there.
Oh.
And he checked the whole airplane. He was able to go down into all the areas. There was no sign of it.
Right.
So anyhow, as a result of reporting it, they were taken straight back to Tokyo on the flight as passengers and interrogated. But what came out was that a Japanese man had died in New York, and they wanted to bury him in Japan. So he had been shipped on this freighter.
Oh.
And what happened was that the local news didn't know about the incident in the air. All they knew was that this person had flown his father or whoever it was back to Japan to be buried. And they made a news flash of it, or news item on the paper, and they had a picture of the man.
Oh,
And
God,
the crew had flown the airplanes. That's him.
Oh, my God.
So his body was in the hold of the airplane, and he was wondering what the hell was going on. Yeah, he was wondering what was, because I think a lot of people who have no belief in an afterlife are quite stunned and shocked when they lay down their body and where am I? It must be, I don't have hands, but I can see.
Yes, yeah. I had a brief moment of that once, about 1996 probably. I was very tired. I don't know why. It's in the days before computers. I was making a poster for an event that I was organizing. So I was cutting and pasting and things like that, sitting on the floor. And I fell asleep, except I didn't. My body fell asleep.
All right, okay.
And I felt my head drop like this. But I was still kind of looking around thinking, what just happened,
Wow.
I actually felt my physical body drop.
Had you thought before that you were possibly more than your body?
I don't know if I had. I don't remember. It wasn't that coherent.
Right.
I was into reading books about spirituality and self-development and all that kind of thing. And at the time, I was living in a house that was haunted, funnily enough.
Oh, right, okay.
Not in a bad way, but I had a guitar that was hanging on the wall. And as I was falling asleep, this guitar would move. It would rattle on the wall.
Oh, wow.
Tick, tick, ticking away.
Yeah.
And in the end, and there'd be knocks on the door, and I'd say, look, I'm trying to go to sleep. Do you mind? Please stop doing that. I think it was underneath my bedroom, actually. There was a dining room.
Yeah.
I was in there one day doing something, and I felt this wind, and all the doors and windows were shut. I felt it go right through me.
Wow.
But again, I wasn't scared.
Right.
It was just a sort of...
It wouldn't have done it if it was going to scare you.
Yeah. And then it would play tricks as well. Yes, I think so. That particular one really stuck with me because at that moment I realized that I wasn't my body, that my consciousness and my body weren't necessarily the same thing.
Right.
So these are very special times that we're living through right now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Have you got a message from you to anybody listening?
Well, basically, my message is what Jesus and Saul are giving us. And I think Jesus's book that I transcribed onto Kindle is excellent in that. And it basically says there is only love. Love is the energy. It's the life force. It's God. It's what you and I are. There is no separation. We are all one. But we chose to experience separation. God created one son, as the Course in Miracles says, and gave him, I mean, it's all male because it comes back from that era, but Mother, Father, God, Source, whatever, created one other. And that other is equal to God in every way, except cannot create God. It was created. That's the only difference. And God gave that creation of his, hers, everything that he already had, the power of creation, everything. And I see it personally as that creation of God's starting to grow up and evolve and wanting to feel independent from his source. And Course in Miracles says that we created the illusion, the world in which we live, the physical environment, and because we wanted to separate from God, not knowing what it meant, and God realizing that it wouldn't work, we would need to come home, immediately provided the way home for us, so that we can, therefore, we have a human life, we die, we go into the spiritual realms, and we think, oh my God, what have I done? And we can come back and learn the lessons we need, because the separation thing is basically insane and totally alien to love. We have to just let it go, believe what Jesus tells us in A Course in Miracles, and also in A Course of Love. Did you come across that?
No, I haven't. No.
That's a lovely book, came out in 2014, A Course of Love, Jesus channeled through a woman called Marie Perron. She too is interviewed on Batcap.
I've heard of her, actually. Yeah.
Right, okay, she's interviewed on Batcap. It's quite interesting, but her books are wonderful. And basically, the message is coming loud and clear from all directions. There is only love. God is love. You are love. Not the ego part of me that is here talking to you, but the real spiritual part that is eternal and never dies. And we chose this experience of separation. And I see it like teenagers growing up. You're there with mummy and daddy and they look after you and everything's fine. And then around 10 or 11, suddenly you get into a peer group and you want to separate from those old people who don't really know what they're talking about. And that's the way it works for me to understand it. And so we're the teenagers learning that, hey, actually, no, you need to be with your father, your mother, whatever.
Yes.
And as long as we allow that and open to it, we become comfortable with it. But the whole culture that we live in the West is you've got to be strong and independent and do it yourself.
Yes, exactly.
And it's difficult to get a balance between that.
Yeah. The one question I didn't ask you was whether you choose when the channeling comes, or whether it comes to you when, like.
No, it's me that chooses. When I initially asked, I got Saul and he came in. And after that, I used to sit down and invite him in, and then he would come and I would get a message. And then after I started doing Jesus, the same thing. And I honestly can't tell the difference between them. I choose who I'm going to invite in, either Saul or Jesus, and I assume that's who I get. And other people say they definitely see a difference between the energy and the messages, definitely.
Yeah.
I don't, and it doesn't really worry me. It's interesting that I'm very sort of 3D that way. I think that's why I'm doing it, because I'm not caught up in trying to, people have said, oh, is Saul St. Paul? And I don't know, it doesn't really matter. Saul is the name he gave me,
No, the message is the thing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And so I don't delve into what other things might have happened beforehand. What is important is that these messages are coming now because they are for now.
Yes.
Simple as that, yeah.
John, that's amazing. We've had a really good chat all around the world, pretty much, haven't we?
Yeah. I don't know if we've covered the sort of stuff you want. You said we in all your notes.
I think so. I was curious to know about the man behind the channeling. I wanted to know your story, and we've covered that.
Okay, well, it's been lovely meeting you, Alicia. Thank you very much
nice
indeed.
to chat with you, John.
Namaste.
And you too. Yes, you take care, and maybe we'll chat again at some point in the future.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks very much. Okay, goodbye.
Bye.
As you continue to move most purposefully forward through your awakening process, slow down. When you do this, you will find meaning in activities that previously seemed meaningless, and your sense of lack of time or not enough time will dissolve. You will then find yourselves feeling more at peace, more content with the actual flow of life that you are experiencing. Your feelings of stress will reduce, and you will start to enjoy the moment instead of expectantly and perhaps impatiently waiting for the next, and the next, and the next. And as you set the intent to live lovingly, whatever arises, others who are just becoming aware that they are spiritual beings having a temporary experience in form will be drawn to you because of the light that you are emitting, and their presence in your presence will uplift and inspire them and you